So, I want to do something a little different today. I want to talk about the recent adaptation of Superman. Don't worry, there won't be any spoilers. To find out that the true identity of Superman is in fact Clark Kent, you'll have to look elsewhere. Well, okay, I guess I just spoiled that, but oh well. Instead, what I want to talk about are the overall themes in broad strokes. But first, a little background. Not on Superman, who I'm sure you're all reasonably familiar with, but on director James Gunn. James Gunn has spent his career in film depicting and deconstructing toxic masculinity. For more information on that, see Jesse Gender's videos on the topic. But basically, at this point in his career, he's finally confident enough to depict an example of positive masculinity in Superman. This is significant because one of the biggest criticisms that you'll hear of the idea of toxic masculinity is that there's no positive masculinity to put it up against. The term toxic masculinity is seen as almost redundant. Why even bother specifying toxic masculinity when you can just say masculinity and everyone knows that that is a toxic thing? One criticism that conservatives in particular will use against leftists using the term toxic masculinity is claiming that they're just trying to get rid of all men, since all men are toxic, according to them. Or they might say things like, why even bother saying toxic masculinity? Just say masculinity, since apparently it's all toxic. And there's something to be said for those arguments. Assuming, of course, that they're being made in good faith. But I have good news for those conservatives. We now have a mainstream depiction of positive masculinity. So, in short, their very valid concerns have been put to rest, and we can all move on. Except that that's not what happens. Instead, conservatives changed their tune. Instead of celebrating the fact that there was now a positive role model and that it was indeed not all men, as they had allegedly been pushing for, they now started attacking Superman for other transgressions. Namely, that he was weak. But is Superman weak in this movie? What do they even mean by weak? Do they mean that he can no longer juggle planets in his hands? Well, if that's the case, they would technically be correct. Juggling planets is rather a dumb concept and hasn't been a thing since the Golden Ages. But, yeah, this version of Superman certainly can't do that. That is accurate. Spoilers, by the way. But no, this is clearly not what they're talking about. Superman still has all of his powers and strength. He can still leap tall buildings in a single bound. He's still routinely mistaken for birds and or planes. He can still take a punch from the Incredible Hulk, where applicable. So in short, no, he's not weak. Not in the physical sense, at least. So then what is it that conservatives mean? Well, one example that Ben Shapiro cites is this one scene where Superman apologizes to Lois and listens to her. Yeah, they'd had an argument earlier in the movie, and now Superman is apologizing and listening, making him weak. According to Ben Shapiro, who, as we all know, is a genius. A man listening to a woman? A boyfriend listening to a girlfriend? Weak! Seriously, that's the argument. The idea that a man listening to a woman is weak. Gay, even. And by gay, they of course mean weak. Because conservatives are nothing but schoolyard bullies at heart. This is obviously a problem, and obviously there's a lot to unpack with that, but let's come back to that, because that actually leads into another related problem. So you remember how conservatives were complaining about the concept of toxic masculinity because there's no positive masculinity to contrast it to? Well, here we see very clearly that every time there is an example of positive masculinity, they just dismiss it as not masculinity. Conservatives are the ones defining positive masculinity out of existence. Also, if we take this line of reasoning to its logical, and yet very illogical conclusion, what conservatives are saying here is that men who practice positive masculinity are not men at all. They're women. Remember, conservatives do not acknowledge the existence of non-binary people, so to them, it is a binary option. If they are not men, they must be women, because that is the only other option in their binary. So men who practice positive masculinity are women, but at the same time, trans women are men, despite the fact that trans women have much more thoroughly and intentionally rejected masculinity. Just because. Honestly, you shouldn't even try to understand conservative logic. There lies madness. And madness in both senses, because conservatives are always angry. And then, when their anger and hatred drives away everyone who was once close to them, they blame the trans community. Or the liberal mob in general. And thus we get people like Graham Linehan, who claims they took everything from me, when in reality, he destroyed his own life. He became so toxic and so all-consumed by his hatred of trans people that he drove his family away. They could no longer stand to be around him. And it's not just Graham Linehan either. I could give an example much closer to home for myself personally. But Graham Linehan is a public figure and an acceptable target. And more people know who he is and who I'll be talking about. So yeah, we're talking about Graham Linehan. That is who we are talking about here. But to bring this back around to something positive, yeah, this movie is great. Go see it. And if you are a man, then be like Superman. Not with the laser vision and whatnot. Just listen to your girlfriend. Listen to various women in your life. Don't become so toxic that you push everyone in your life away. That's really all it takes. It's not that hard. And go watch the movie.